You're still a little dark.
Um,
But
I don't have much control over that. That comes in and out, but
yeah. Okay.
yeah,
Well, that's fine.
it was better yesterday. It was better yesterday.
I think if you get a little, if you stay a little closer to your camera, I don't know. It could,
Well,
you're right. It does kind of go in and out.
it depends on what's going on, but
Yeah. Well, how are you today?
good, good,
Good.
good. Today is this is the third of 4 meetings and a presentation today.
Oh my goodness. Well, we're really grateful that you carved out the time for, to be with us today, and it's really an honor to have you with us.
Thank you.
Um, I thought what I'd do, there's still some students kind of coming on and so forth, but there we go. Um, but as they are joining us, what I thought we would do is, sorry, I'm goofing up my screen here,
Mhm.
trying to get to some of my notes. There we go. I thought what I'd do as a way to kind of start the introduction is to just um, mention to the students that you were one of 7 African American design professionals that participated in this amazing conversation several months ago that was recorded for posterity in the August issue of the Landscape Architecture magazine. And I've shared the article with the students. I've also shared your bio and have invited them to take a look at that on the Blackboard site. I won't go into all of the details. I'll let you mention what you like in terms of your, you starting your own business and the work that you did with low-income housing back in the mid-90s and so forth. But I really wanted to kind of focus in on some of the amazing things that were brought out in that conversation and then recorded in this article called The Twin Pandemics. The
Yeah.
full title of the article is Black Designers on the Landscape of Public Health and Public Violence.
Mhm.
And I'd like to just read the introductory paragraph for the students. It reads, Black people and Black communities bear the outsized impacts of public violence and now the deadly coronavirus. 6 Black landscape architects, including you, and an architect, parse the spatial factors that underlie each crisis, often both crises, and the kinds of actions and reforms they hope to see.
Mhm.
So with that as kind of the introduction, I just want to say how honored we are to be able to uh, have the opportunity to explore in a little greater depth some of these issues that were raised by you and your colleagues in this conversation. But I'd like to begin, if you don't mind, by asking you to share a little bit of your kind of personal history in terms of like where you were born and grew up, and some of your
So
school activities and that sort of thing, just so we can get some flavor for how you ended up in the field of landscape architecture.
a little context. So
Yeah.
thank you. I just want to first say, because this is an honor for me to talk to students at North Carolina A&T. This is a story program. It is the legendary program, actually, and the bigger of the two, of only two that are currently at HBCUs. And I believe very strongly that it's our obligation to support this program as much as we can as professionals. Um, and with that, that's a high-minded plug for, we have an internship program, so keep us in mind. But
Okay, well that's good to know. And I've also included your contact information in your bio, so if folks have their interest piqued after this conversation, I hope that they'll give you a ring or email you, and or at the very least, is there information on your website about the internship program, or would it be better to email or call?
Emailing, and it's very easy. It's info@eklastudio.com, and I'll repeat that several times in the talk.
All right, great.
And it'll get to the appropriate attention.
Good.
I am Elizabeth Kennedy, sometimes known as the Elizabeth Kennedy. I was talking to Paul yesterday, and he was saying, well, you know, you come from immigrant parents, and I want to give a little context to that. I am the daughter and the niece of architects.
Oh.
And so my parents met when my dad was a student going to Columbia University at night. He was a hospital orderly by day, putting himself through college, and he studied architecture at Columbia. And because he went at night, it took him a long time to graduate. It took him about 9 years to finish the program. And there were numerous setbacks along the way. But the advantage to all of this is that we grew up with architecture in the house.
Yeah.
You know, his board was at home, his markers were at home, his pencils were at home. My mother says that when he had a deadline, she says, well, you and I would stay up and help him draw crazy paving. What we know as fieldstone and ashlar paving was crazy paving to my mother.
Okay.
But in that exercise, if my dad was building a model, my brother and I would build models. And my models and my drawings of houses always had streams running through them and rocks in the living room. And he would very excitedly say, oh, Frank Lloyd Wright. You're 7. Who, you know, what has this got to do with anything? But I grew up in the profession. And when my father finished university and finished working for a bit, he and my mother are both of Jamaican heritage, and my family, he moved the family to Jamaica soon after independence to be part of nation building there.
Oh, wow.
And so I grew up in the Jamaica of the 70s. This is when Bob Marley emerged, and when liberation theory was very much, you know, talking point, and a way that emerging economies could think about addressing their needs. And
Got 3 of his albums, by the way.
well, you know, my brother crewed for, my brother's in the music industry, and he crewed for Bob Marley at one
Did
point.
he really?
Yeah.
Oh, man, what a thrill.
Yeah. So there's that heritage and background. But hold on one second for me. This is what happens when you're in a room. Guys, and we want to talk about minority. You know, guys, I'm on a conference call, so we need to get over to the law. We have deadlines and people working around the world, and there's somebody in Mexico who you hear her texting in the background because I have not figured out how to shut up my iPad. But you know, this is like a Monty Python sketch at all times. This is the secret.
No worries at all.
Of practice. But I did grow up in this business, and had the opportunity after living in Jamaica for 8 years to return to the United States and pursue higher education. And so I went to Cornell, and
Okay.
I went at a time when, quite frankly, there were more financial opportunities for people like me, and I had the opportunity to study environmental psychology at an undergrad, and then study landscape architecture at the master's level. And I emerged from graduate school into a recession. And amongst my classmates, I was the only one to get a job, and I worked for a tiny firm for about 3 years. And that owner decided to move across country, and she closed her office. And I started a very long trajectory of freelancing. And I wouldn't recommend any of this to anybody, but this is what I did.
It's the path, whatever it is.
It's the path, right? And in the course of this long path, including a long path to licensure, I worked in construction and I worked in the development of affordable housing. And I actually taught myself real estate development through having a project management job. I sat down and had to figure out on paper everything that was being thrown at me so that I knew how to respond and manage things. And I attribute a lot of that to my background in design, the ability to solve problems, to sort of look broadly at issues. And that company also went under. There's a theme here. and,
Well,
and,
before you go any further, could I just ask a little bit more detail about the connection between what you learned in school and how you put that to work in that situation where you were basically on the seat?
I definitely. There are a lot of different things that go into your journey, and I guess when you get to be my age, and even Paul's age, and I know that Paul is younger than I am, I guarantee you, that there's no single trajectory. It's not a straight line. You're pinging, and it's almost, you're lucky it's not an entirely pinball careering between points. But your objective has to be that in each one of these instances, you build on the skills that you developed before. And I wanted to make that kind of an important point, because even with young people who are graduating and you're going out into the workplace, we often see portfolios that are not building on the basics. They're sort of, ambitiously trying to save the world and solve very ambitious problems, but the fundamentals of what we do are not grounded in the documents. And that's very important. And I think something that that North Carolina A&T can actually hang its hat on, because everybody that I've worked with or come across who's gone to that program came out with a real solid foundation of the understanding of what it is to build in landscape architecture. And it might not sound glamorous, but it's absolutely fundamental and it's necessary. And I think it's something that, as we talk a little bit more, you as students should make sure that you can treasure. But what happened was that my undergraduate degree in landscape in environmental psychology obviously begins to shape how people, the exploration of how people experience the environment, and how they experience the environment for different purposes. And so, there was an undergrad, there were different degrees, but one sort of informed the second degree. And then in working in landscape architecture, you're of course working in a profession that spans art and construction. So you have to know construction, and you have to understand the aesthetics, how things are, again, experienced and how that comes together. And then, because so much of what you're doing is based on how people see things and how people experience things, that even when you go further into one area or another, and when I did affordable housing, it was more definitely in terms of construction, I was able to understand, well, okay, I know how to build, I know how to use concrete, I know how to move earth, I know how to plant, and I know the elements of carpentry. So how does that begin to do? I manage the construction of maybe 220 units of affordable housing. So how does that begin to inform the process of how you can deliver rehabilitated architecture and new architecture in a way that it's affordable and can have positive impacts on communities? So that was the work that I had to do.
So this was not new construction, it was actually restoration of...
It was both. It was both.
Okay.
It was both. And one of my responsibilities was estimating, so I had to learn how to quantify jobs. And I was winning jobs for the company by $15. So, when they talk about sharpening your pencil, I could do that. And so even if I'd moved from design to construction and had the opportunity to look more in terms of construction management, I was definitely building on my experience and my training in landscape architecture. Mm-hmm. So be that as it may, it turned out there's one component in all of this that I'm sort of leaving out, but it's important. Um, in between these sort of longer jobs, I did a lot of freelancing, and in the 80s, I'm dating myself, in the 80s and 90s, that was easier to do. I mean, it predates what we know as the gig economy, but uh, there was a different sort of understanding about your career trajectory. So I was doing a lot of that, and I had a friend who, she's passed away now, but she was always starting businesses. And she said, listen, I'm going to take this course. It's called the Workshop in Business Opportunities. And I want you, why don't you come along? I want company. And I said, well, what am I doing? Okay. So I accompanied her to this, and it was one of the things that changed my life, because what it did before entrepreneurship became as broadly understood as it is now, it was a training platform for entrepreneurship. And so that, as much as my formal Cornell training and my work in architecture and my work in construction, that this business background allowed me to do a couple of things. First of all, it allowed me to go into housing development and really understand the numbers. I knew how things had to, where the numbers needed to be, how they needed to move, what was being proposed, what determined profitability. And profitability, and with profitability comes sustainability, because if you don't have money to turn over into the next thing, you can't move forward. So we had all of these things. And it of course then allowed me to open my own doors. And after that company also closed, it turned out I was the only person in the firm that was running jobs profitably. But I had a relatively small portfolio, and they were overextended. So I was collecting unemployment when I started EKLA. I was writing business plans and thinking that $250,000 was more than any amount of money on the planet, and I didn't understand how it would happen. And
is that what you needed in order to get started? What is that 250,000?
That's what I knew it would cost a year to run a business.
Okay.
And
in Brooklyn?
In New York,
Okay.
and yeah. And what that ended up meaning was that that was very hard to get to. I didn't have a track record whereby I could start and immediately win a $250,000 contract. We are here after 25 years doing that. And in a lot of markets, $250,000 is a very big contract, and in other markets, it's nothing, So even understanding that there's a range of what $250,000 means in terms of work that took a long time to fully understand. And I started the firm, like I said, on unemployment, and then I saw an ad at the Amsterdam News for a community garden project, and I applied and I won the contract, and I read it and I thought this was rubbish, and I rewrote the scope of work, and the client was like, well, okay, but and what I thought was that there was an opportunity here to look at an entire Harlem, Upper Manhattan neighborhood as an urban ecosystem. And the focus shouldn't have been on 5 community gardens, but it should have been on the quality of all of the open space that made up a neighborhood, the streetscapes, the interstitial spaces, the backyards, and how you informed a community about the value of these spaces so that the community could act in its own interest to make sure that open space was protected. This is how the firm started. And it's interesting to see 25 years later that this is exactly the point where we are now, because it's been forced open. I won't say that I was prescient. I was kind of dumb. I don't think I would have done the same thing now. But the naivete of sort of being idealistic and and reading between the lines actually kind of worked.
So that, I don't want to interrupt your train of thought, but what you're talking about dovetails really nicely with one of the points that you made in the conversation that was recorded in this Twin Pandemics article, and it was about this sense of Black and brown people feeling almost invisible in their own neighborhoods. Could you speak to that within the context of this, of kind of understanding and appreciating all the different kinds of open space within a community beyond just 5 community garden kinds of things?
Well, what was, I think that particular article, it was an article in the New York Times about how the pandemic had brought to certain people's attention the sort of open space opportunities that actually existed in the city. And this was before New York sort of opened its streets to sidewalk dining and all these other things that are also changing the way we look at neighborhoods. And I read the article carefully because at no point was the open space described in a way that ordinary New Yorkers would have recognized as a playground. First of all, if anybody's from New York, you know that New Yorkers call playgrounds parks. You know,
Okay.
they don't say, you know, they might be formal and say this is a playground, but I'm going to the park. Let's go to the park. Let's hang out in the park, right? And so the park is like the term Phoenix. It sort of has this generic application to public open space.
Got it.
And so in these descriptions, there was a very sort of anodyne or very sort of generic description about a big space with this big blank wall, and all of a sudden this person decided that in the working home they take a break and go there and practice tennis. And I thought, this is so the New York Times, and this is so this issue, because this person is talking about a handball court. And handball courts are very heavily used in New York City. They're particularly used by people of color, right? And so what was it about this person that walked past a handball court every day and did not see a handball court? And not just, you know, you could excuse maybe, you know, the tunnel vision that you get when you're heading towards the subway in order to get on the train or the bus to go to work. But on the weekends, this space was also not visible. And so
it's like a cultural blindness in a way.
it was exactly a cultural blindness to the people. What was it about its use by certain people that made it invisible? And that to me goes to the heart of so many questions that New Yorkers are facing, you know, about gentrification, about information, about who belongs where, and how in a city that's very diverse, people are not actually mingling, you know, in a way, in the way that the city functions as a whole. And so that to me was sort of like a case point, because, you know, the New York Times at the same time is published 19 Project and all of these other things. So, you know, one hand is giving and the other hand is taking away. So how that balance is struck and how these conversations need to be had to be able to understand how people understand their context has really been a question, because COVID, the whole explosion of COVID-19 within New York City in particular was very telling. The way the epidemics spread, the communities that were affected. You know, there are a lot of different layers and complexities to this, but a large part of it had to do with understanding of place, in my opinion.
Could you go into that a little bit deeper and help us understand the connection between the understanding of space or lack of understanding and how that sort of played out in terms of how it has been playing out in terms of COVID, and to some degree, I suppose you could also bring in any kind of sort of discrepancies in how policing is done.
Mhm. Oh, okay, I have to keep
I mean,
track.
it's two separate things, but it's sorry, I didn't mean to throw too much at you.
Yeah. To me, it's a very sort of fine-grained, or what we call granular sort of issue. And let's go to what we do. Um, there were whole communities that didn't understand that you had to cover your face in shared space.
Uh,
There were whole communities that that don't understand what space is. You know, they don't define space the way we as professionals define space. So the idea of covering your face in space, what does that mean, right?
uh,
Um, the whole, you know, to a certain extent, the whole inability for science or the medical community to really understand transmission, that people in shared spaces, people who had to take public transportation in crowded communities, people who work in close proximity, all of these other things, were highly exposed to the virus, right?
mhm.
Um, that people who could retreat to homes that were more, you know, just socioeconomically, homes that are less crowded, homes that have more spaces, homes that have terraces or views, or ability to even open windows and get cross ventilation, so all of those things. Then when people were crowded, you know, going out to do something innocent like play basketball became a punishable offense. You know, the governor was calling you out on his daily briefing. Um, it, I think that that there was that dimension. Then I think, quite frankly, there was an understanding by community of who was affected and who wasn't. Um, a lot of people didn't believe that this would affect people of color. A lot of people didn't believe that because we come from we come from southern climates. This was a ridiculous notion, but here it is. And I think even the prejudices that communities hold for themselves sort of reinforce uh, issues that can hurt us. I'm not blaming the communities, but there's some responsibility for also making sure that you understand public health and
Uh-huh.
in its full dimension. I think just that term full dimension is sort of part of the crux of the matter, because increasingly the message is this seat at the table is not necessarily for you. And so even in the energy to fight to take that seat at the table, it places so much of the dialogue in another context, and exhausts an understanding of the issue, just trying to make sure that you can aim for equity.
Right.
That um, that you're like salmon at the end of a run. You know, you're just totally you're just totally depleted by the time you can sit. And the information that you need in order to sit at that table and communicate your needs, you haven't really had a chance to really build out that thesis as completely as it can be,
Sure.
because you've just been struggling.
Yeah.
So one
Well,
of
if
the,
you're working two or three jobs and you're having to take an hour and a half just to get to work and an hour and a half back in order to get to your next thing, and I mean, just
that, and that's definitely some people. That's an issue. Um, one of the discussions we're having is about is the story 2000% one of pain, and it's not, but it's definitely more the story of poverty, and what poverty exacts, because I've lived in poor communities, and I'll tell you, poverty is a full-time job. It is a full-time, just that existence is full-time. And so um, the coincidence of poverty and ethnicity and culture, and by extension, kinfolk relationships and all of these other things that go into this larger picture begin to describe what was happening where.
So talk with us a little bit about the roles that landscape architects and other environmental designers and planners could play in bridging that gap and providing more opportunity for people to be able to have the space and the time and the energy to be able to, formulate a clearer picture of what their needs are and to be able to articulate those things. I mean, for instance, within, I don't know, within any context, affordable housing or whatever, where professional designers have some role to play in engaging people, engaging the people for whom they're doing design work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure you know, community-based design is very, very different to having an individual client.
Yeah.
Right? But the model looks to turn a community into an individual client.
Uh-huh.
The processes by which we have the dialogues and everything is synthesized down to some, sort of singular direction. And
so give me an example, like the city wants to do community engagement, but basically the city becomes the client instead of the community. Is that what you're saying?
No. Even first of all, I think one of the things that's happening right now is the profession is rethinking engagement. I think we're having a moment now where engagement that we've understood for the past 40 years is not the model that we need to move forward. If only because the solutions have not the results have not really provided the solutions that were dreamt of when
Yes.
in the renderings, right? So the nature of engagement is up for grabs. The questions that we need to be asking are up for grabs. The way we listen are up for grabs. And I'm beginning to think that the hypothesis going in has to change. That you don't think of the community as this single element. The community is a multi-headed hydra. It is made up of all of these elements and components and colors and flavors and textures and opinions and elements of tastes and all of these other things. And the idea that you're going to sort of get it down to one thing in order to move forward with a design solution might be the wrong approach.
Yeah. So does it mean a finer grain of detail in terms of design solutions for different parts of a neighborhood or community versus, here's the broad consensus, we're going to make one size fits all? Is that, I don't want to put words in.
I think right now we look for the one size fits all solution. And I think because it suits the profession. And I actually think what's going to happen, and this may or may not be a good thing, is that the profession itself might lurch towards the ideas of looking more at models that come out of informal settlement and accretive settlement, things like that, that can't be as predictive in terms of and design intent. And so the issue might be one where designers create frameworks in which communities can then resolve and take agency for its members.
Could you explain that a little bit? Like, what would a framework look like? Can you give us an example of what that might
be? Well, we have frameworks now. We have zoning and planning codes and fire codes and building codes, and they're there to ensure the health, safety, and welfare of the public.
Mm-hmm.
The extent to which an understanding of those codes allows some flexibility might be one of the questions. Definitely, I think planners are going to be looking at that question, and then how this then filters down to our level, which is landscape architects are operating at a detail level in terms of the planning process, right?
Yeah.
Um, Similarly, it's going to, I think it's going to inform urban design in ways that um, our training is going to have to, I think, become again more, are scaling the details further down. We might become what we call more granular, looking at the smaller piece and the larger piece.
Right, right.
So that might require different formal understandings, or maybe formal, like, different compositional understandings, different design approaches, things like that.
Right, right. So correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things you pointed out in your conversation that was in the article was this example of a student coming up with a design solution for in a food desert, and the student had a very simple kind of, well, you just bring in bags of dirt, of nice soil, and it becomes this sort of micro farming kind of thing. Wouldn't that be cool? And apparently the student was like coming up with some pretty clever things, but it was poo-pooed by whoever the jury members were as it not being formal enough, or not having the right kind of aesthetics. Yeah.
That this was an architecture program and the solution was an architecture.
Um, Is that what you're kind of getting at in terms of like sort of a deformalizing of,
Yeah.
having the solutions already set in your head?
Yeah. Oh, well, that level of arrogance is, we're going to be paying for that. I mean, there's a, there's a reason why I think architects are sort of lambasted for this, or lambasted for it. That that's a different conversation about the sort of selling the profession on the basis of aesthetics only. But I think that what the reviewers either didn't recognize or chose to ignore was how important agency was. And what I liked about the solution was that it, I'm hoping that this isn't me making that noise, that it allowed the homeowner to make some very deliberate decisions about bringing agriculture into the living space. That really was the scale at which the proposal was made. And so, not just to have window pots or things growing in on domestically, but to create whole boundaries of space with these systems that needed to work, and then what that meant in terms of light and water and drainage and and air exchange, all of those things.
That's funny. It reminds me of the model building you and your brother did as kids, and having rivers and rocks in the house.
Yeah, I think that idea was sort of allowing nature into the space, and I wouldn't, and in this instance, I think of agriculture as a system, and I think if the person had said, I want to build a systematic party of let's say vertical farming using ultraviolet light, and you sort of see these images that are analogous to library stacks, the sort of stacks, but they are trays of baby lettuce, that kind of thing. It still goes to a sort of element of space shaping and place making with a different sort of technology. And I guess my point is that that's what informal communities do. They using a different technology, a technology that might not be particularly resilient, or might be based entirely on found materials, or whatever that comes together. This is what informal communities do, but it doesn't have the same legitimacy as brick and mortar and all of these other these sort of larger institutional gestures that we're used to, because again, there's no guarantee of compliance with the codes and this and the other. I mean, these things exist for a reason, but there's something in the methodology, I think, that offers an example to be looked at in these terms, and that's what I felt that the critics missed in that analysis.
Got it. So you talked about our profession's noble self-regard and kind of calling that into question a little bit in terms of our kind of general lack of any kind of, well, not very much, at least very authentic engagement and investment in communities of color.
Mm-hmm. And so I would have gone to that point, the point that I was making about understanding things outside of your own experience, that
Right.
The profession is not particularly good at that.
Yeah. So kind of coming back full circle to some of this notion of the profession needing to change, not having a very good track record, kind of needing a paradigm shift is the words you used in the article.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the ways that you think our profession could kind of overcome some of the cultural biases, I'll say, in whether that's being too formal or not listening well enough or whatever? And maybe in particular, if you could talk a little bit about what role you think university programs like ours at NCA&T could play in making that kind of paradigm shift, so that when our students come out, there's a greater sense of how they're, I mean, I honestly, when I look at, I'm heartened by a lot of millennials and folks in our program, because they do see things differently, much differently than I did, going through the program 45 years ago or whatever. So I'm just kind of curious what some of your thoughts are about how we might best move forward as a profession to address some of these biases, and then also what we might do at the university level, because I'm actually talking with other folks around the country who are at various landscape architecture programs about these kinds of issues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the first things I think is the I hate to ask this, but is somebody like running a drill in the background?
Oh, you know what? I'll turn it off. Sorry, I'm in a wooded area, and it's
It's the weed whacker or something?
no, it's cicadas. I
Ah,
apologize. I'll turn it off. I've been trying to turn it off as best I can.
okay. Wonderful, wonderful. I think I think that in the same way doctors had to learn how to listen to patients, the people entering the profession need formal training in listening. And there are examples of this. Anthropologists have to learn how to listen and observe without introducing their own biases into what they're observing, right? Similarly, um, psychologists, right? Psychologists, if you're a practicing psychologist, you also have to be in therapy, because you have to make sure that your own projections are not being placed on your clients, right? So there are precedents for this. And I think to ramp up quickly, it might be simply taking a methodology course in one of these other disciplines. That would be the first thing. And I think that would be an interesting way of doing it, because among other things, you are stepping outside of the bubble of landscape architecture and built environment design. You're looking at this from another one of the social sciences that's actually put this into place, right? I think I think similarly there can be more borrowing from other disciplines to inform our approach to practice. Uh, we do a lot of cultural work, cultural interpretive work. We didn't start out there by any means. And I believe that the few listening skills that I do have didn't come from any sort of disciplinary practice. They came from being in a women's support group where there were rules about how you listened to other women and you heard what they had to say without judging, and you mirrored what they said in order to support or affirm or address what it is that they were putting on the table. These are the tools that need to be, that's low-hanging fruit. They already exist as methodologies elsewhere, and they can be brought in without a sort of touchy-feely sort of demystifying. The learning curve can be relatively short doing that, right? So that would be one thing. There has to be, I think, more discipline in terms of what we do, in terms of understanding, having a better understanding of nuance. And what I mean by that is, what is, in a formal sense, almost academic sense, what is symbol, what is style, what, all of these little things that distinguish one aspect of a response to another, right? We have I'm a designer. I'm a good designer. I'm not a fantabulous designer, but I'm a good designer. But I happen to believe that our profession brings to the table some very solid elementary tools that I don't see a lot of people using. And so, you go back to the basics. You go back to what we bring to the table are not fancy ideas. It's organization. The client wants to achieve something. They want to, and that thing might be very abstract. They might put it in terms that are abstract. And our job is not to deal with that thing, or what we do in my company is not necessarily deal with that thing. We don't deal with the what, we deal with the why. If we answer the why, right, we will satisfy the what. And sometimes clients don't know what they need.
So how do you get to the why? What are some of your techniques in terms of listening skills and interpretation and that sort of thing?
Okay. When I was doing residential work and somebody came to me and said that they wanted a Japanese garden. Now, in terms of our formal understanding about Japanese garden, are you talking about a Japanese tea and meditation garden? Are you talking about what style of Japanese garden are you talking? Do you, client, have in your mind? And sometimes you need them to provide a picture. But you also need to know why they want this. And in this instance, the person said, well, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to look at this. And so then you want to know, okay, what is it about it that it's contextual, or it's material, or it's the time of day, or the quality of light, or all of these other sort of larger, and to use the word again, framework issues that will create the means of moving forward that we need in order to fill in the pieces, right?
And it might not actually be like Japanese per se. It might be more of a sense of there's some aesthetic there that makes me feel a certain way, or
that's exactly correct.
It feels meditative, or it feels simple, or I don't know, So maybe that's part of it, right? Is like that's part of the why.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. You want to understand what it is about this thing this goal that they have, or these objectives that they want to reach, that go to an understanding of what landscape is. Now, and how that is then achieved. Now, that's a very sort of broad, sort of abstract philosophical response. But for us, we term aesthetics as the experience and understanding of a given space, and for that matter, a given landscape. And this is why, and for us also, we feel that it's very contingent on the experience of topography. I think topography, the sense of earth, is the thing that distinguishes landscape architecture, from interior design, from whatever, right? A sense of earth. So you either have a sense of earth or you don't have a sense of earth. That's the first dividing line, and then you go from there. So even when you're doing green roofs, part of the experience of the green roof is the experience of the elevation above the earth. If you're missing that opportunity to sort of pull out the anomaly of the green roof, then I'm not casting aspersions, but you're dealing with the green roof in a stylistic rather than an experiential way.
So can you give us an example of how one does that? How do you celebrate that being up in the middle of the airness?
the itness of air. Well, you know that regardless of who you might be as a person, and regardless of the abilities of your body, you know that there is a sense that Earth feels a certain way, right? That there are. I remember the first time I went to England, I went by boat, and after being at sea for a week, I came off the gangplank and I just kept stamping the ground. I just wanted to feel that I was in England, right? And so, and people will describe this all the time. I've landed, and our language kind of attests to that physical connection to ground.
Yeah, I love it when people come off a plane or something and they get down on the ground and kiss it, like
kiss the ground, right? Yes, exactly. I was thinking about that, but I said, well, okay, maybe that has other. That's also a sense of gratitude about some other things, but it's that sense of groundedness, and so we all experience that in our bodies. You might. I'm not saying whether or not that's an enjoyable or a dismaying experience, but you experience it. So if you don't, and you also experience when you don't feel a sense of groundedness. There's some very physical material things. So as designers, at least in this office, we make those decisions about where things are, and then we build on those decisions. So this is really important when we do interpretive work of historical sites, because a lot of times much of the original physical context is eroded, it's gone, but you have to very quickly sort of immerse the visitor in the experience of the place. And so you don't decorate, you sort of go to those elemental things, and then you build out the experience from there. And this
I
is
was
why,
curious too about how you got into so much historic kinds of work. Was it just you took a project on, you did well, and people said, "Hey, yeah, she knows what she's doing," or like how was that, like something that you already had a deep interest in, or?
No, I'm sorry to be so in so much shadow. I think
You're back.
the computer went back, right? The computer lens is just averaging, I think. No, I think this sort of brings part of the conversation in full circle. I got that work because I'm a Black woman, and the people who originally had the work very cynically felt that, well, she's a Black woman, so she's got to understand this story. And I mean, I could go into more professional detail about it, but we started with a project of a specific African American community in North Central Brooklyn. And I tell people, this is not my story. My own heritage story is one of Caribbean immigrant, right? So that automatic assumption that we're all the same
Right.
is ludicrous. So, but nonetheless, those other skills that I did have in terms of really listening, um, you know, analyzing what was being said and what the analogies were and what in my own experience and what was foreign to me, um, allowed us to really sort of focus on what was, and I like to say we focus on what's important in the story.
Uh-huh.
So, um, we've worked with other architects who also work in this sphere, and their take on this is very, very different. They're very much caught up in, they work a lot with symbols and symbolism and this. And, we're sitting there, I'm like, wow, that's interesting. Who would have thought of looking at it that way? So I mean, this is the methodology of the firm, and it's directed by me. So this is my own take on it.
Mm-hmm.
But this approach to it allowed us to work with a conservative Jewish community on the restoration of a historic cemetery. And they were saying, well, it's a charitable interment, and that was the story. And I said, no, that's not the story. You have lots of organizations. Before Social Security, the country was sort of supported by all these fraternal organizations. And once you really begin to understand that, when you hear about the fraternal order of the such and such, even in the honeymooners, right? You really understand that this stems from a turn of the 20th century idea that immigrant communities and all these people in movement, migration, needed support in moving from one place to the other, and these organizations formed to support people who had less means. And historically, some of them have been disbanded because it's believed that the social safety net is adequate enough that it's no longer needed. But there's a whole history there of that way of thinking about the country that, in terms of our cemeteries and other things, are emblems of place. And so we were able to point that out to the client as the basis of their application to the National Register for Historic Places. So even how you understand that you're going to focus on something that that this is the linchpin of the story. This is the thing on which the story hinges. This is what
It's
you want
back to that idea of framework, right? It's like, well, it's a bigger framework. Yes, that is true. That one little,
that
issue.
one little nugget then becomes the element on which the whole design is organized. So I mean, it's a little harder to do in urban design because there's so many moving factors that are contemporary. Whereas a historical site, you are looking to capture some aspect of this in amber. There's a sort of, there's a different timeline to it because landscapes continue always to live and evolve. And part of the issue is that you're designing, sustainability, you're designing with that change and evolution and that ongoing process in mind. But there are different aspects of what you focus on.
Yeah, yeah. Listen, we're coming close to the end of our time, and I wanted to see, number one, if there was anything that you wanted to share with us in terms of sharing your screen, and then number two, if the students have any questions for you based on all the marvelous ideas that you've been sharing with us. So let me ask you first, do you want to share anything, or do you feel like you've painted enough of a picture with your work to give a...
I did pull up a PowerPoint of a presentation that actually I gave maybe a week or two ago. It's a blur now. And whereas that took 15 or 20 minutes, this will take all of a minute and a half because I'll just go through the slides. And if I can, okay, I remember now how to share things. So I'm not guaranteeing share application and screen, application window. Aha. I'm hoping that we won't see infinite. I'm guessing that you see my screen now. Are we still here?
Yep.
Hi, okay. So maybe these were questions. We were talking about actually Black equity and justice in practice. And I wanted to talk about some of the issues that EKLA faces. And so, you know, when we're working with clients, we are concerned with equity and say, you know, for whom is the work, by whom is the work, when, who makes the decisions, and how. Equity and resources. This is actually my office, my staff charretting on different questions. And as you can see, we are very diverse. Equity in planning and development. Who makes decisions at the top level and who makes the decisions at the grassroots level? Who gets, again, who gets to decide? Whose word counts? Equity and representation. Obviously, how is the story told? This is one of our better known projects, the Weeksville Heritage Center. And when we were designing this, we had some very large sort of landscape formal elements that we never dreamed would be interpreted and used in any way, shape, or form. And this is a dance performance that's coming up through a meadow that we designed. And for that matter, how we have to actually let go of what we thought of in the beginning to sort of explain to people how, you know, to allow the stakeholders of the clients to say, well, you know, how is this story going to be reimagined? And, you know, who protects the legacy? There's equity and outcome, who gets to say? And in closing, equity, in terms of equity and outcome, who owns the rights to the work? Because a lot of times, the way contracts are let, you might do something that's innovative and it goes on to attract a lot of positive attention, but you have to fight to get your name recognized as not just contributing to it, but making it happen because of the nature of the contract or the nature of forces that are beyond your control that sort of see that as a competing interest. So that's really, let me see, click to exit, click to exit, click to exit. I'll close this and I will stop sharing. And that was a 90-second tour of what took 20 minutes the other day. But I'm here for any questions.
Let me just open things up and see if anybody would like to make any comments or ask anything.
And maybe people can show their screens.
Yeah, that'd be great. You all turn your screens on for a minute?
You can see how many people are in the bathroom.
I see one. Anyone have any questions or any thoughts?
I joined late, so
Okay.
where are you from? Where do you work again?
My practice is in Brooklyn, New York. It's we're actually celebrating our 25th year. We are the longest surviving firm headed by a woman in the United States.
I was just in Brooklyn.
Good for you.
Okay.
Well, it looks like, was this recorded?
It is recorded.
Okay.
Would you like to have access to it?
I'd love to have access to it. Yeah.
Okay, I haven't figured out exactly how to do it, but I think if I just share the link, the issue is that it's recorded through Blackboard, and you have to sign into Blackboard as either a student or a faculty member. So the question is whether or not somebody outside of Blackboard can get in.
Convert it to a WMD or something.
Yeah, so you'll be my guinea pig if you don't mind. But it occurred to me that there might be other guests that we've had, interviews with who might also be interested in their recording. So I will be sure and share it with you, and if you'll just let me know whether or not it actually allows you in, that'd be great.
That'd be fun. Yeah.
Elizabeth, this has been such a delight to talk with you, and we're really honored that you were able to carve out this time in your schedule, and it's wonderful that all the beautiful work that you've done, and we're really pleased that you were willing to and able to be with us today. And I will continue to sort of encourage our students to think about contacting you for potential internships. And also there is a program that's sort of afoot within our landscape architecture program called Diversity by Design, which I'll share with you through probably Chris Harrison, our new program director, just for you to get a sense of like what we're thinking about. And this class of key issues and ideas is one of the strategies that we're using, along with this notion of how do we do a better job as a program to connect our students up with practicing professionals. So anyway, we're grateful that you have been a part of this today, and I look forward to continuing our relationship. And
yes. Well, thank you. I really enjoyed this. It was a perfect hour, so that really worked too.
great.
And, for everybody who tuned in, I wish you all success, and Paul will definitely be in touch.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
Bye.